Hello, Gospel Revolutionaries. It's already session 3 of the 2026 Calgary Grace Conference. We welcome everybody listening, not just our friends in Calgary, but also our friends across the world. Thanks for tuning in.
We really do appreciate it. And next to being right in Calgary, we are here in Clarksville, Tennessee. So they both start with a C. That's the only comparison. I've got one of my favorite shirts on. I'll not stand up to show you the rest of it. It says, "I'm often mistaken for an adult." And the bottom part says, "Because of my age." So don't make that mistake and think I'm an adult just because of my age, because that is not true. There's many ways to define adulthood, right? So this has been so far really eye-opening. It's been very settling for me. It's like taking all of these things that we've learned about the gospel for over 40 years and now being able to put it in a panoramic, definitive understanding and structure that says the same thing about all of it all over again. Yes, all over again and all over again. Because even though we change our minds about what specific passages and things actually mean and what was intended by the scriptures, that's what you have to do when you define what is the authority. The authority is the scriptures. At least that's what Christ had to say. And our mystic friends are just going crazy right now. No, they're not, because they're not listening. But they're saying, no, the authority is Christ. Well, the issue with Christ is there is no authority. He equalized authority. He didn't come here to set up a religion called Christianity or any other form. So we're not dealing with authority now, but what we are dealing with is the authority of where we learn from. And where we learn from, even Christ himself diverted our attention from his own teachings. It diverted our attention away from the disciples' own experience. And he makes it very clear that these are wonderful and important things. He certainly did not diminish them. But in the pursuit of truth, he did diminish them. He diminished his own, the very things that he did himself. He let us know very clearly that outside that being in the scriptures, that it had no power at all. Think of that. Christ himself was declaring to us and did declare and does declare that everything that happened from his birth through his life, birth, death, burial, and resurrection has no meaning if it wasn't foretold in the scriptures. It has no meaning if it was not foretold in the scriptures. Our PowerPoint in understanding the gospel is that we don't teach things that we learned took place after the cross. We teach things that were declared before the cross. And there is where we find the major difference. And not that we're looking for a difference, we'd like to find some sameness, but we don't synthesize truth. We look for the truth and let it stand for itself, as Paul did and as Christ did. Boy, didn't I put us in some good company right
Yes.
there? So we do it like Paul did. We did it like Jesus did. And the rest of you just don't count. But we're all trying to learn, folks. And you'll have to pardon my levity, because don't mistake me for an adult. The power of the gospel is clarified by the hermeneutics of the gospel. And we went through all of those weeks, 7 weeks of teaching about the different hermeneutics. The ones on Buddhism and the different religions, Hinduism. Oh my gosh, you could not get more clear as to why there's so much confusion with all of that. It is because of its hermeneutical inheritance of definition of truth. And it cancels itself out. It really is quite amazing how it declares one thing and then says one thing is, if it's there, it means nothing is real. You heard it already. So We are really, really happy to be continuing this. Daniel and I had quite a bit of discussion about exactly where to go because all of a sudden we've made it through the hermeneutics. If you have any questions about it, please ask. Then we let Christ expose and expound on himself the hermeneutics of the gospel. He made it very clear the Jews had completely misunderstood. It wasn't because the Jews were bad people. It was because they had bad doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he was angry with. They came up with fence laws. They came up with Pharisees and scribes and synagogues. None of that was anything instituted by God. The promise never, ever produced Judaism. Let me say it one more time. The promise of God to Abraham never produced Judaism. And Jesus made it very clear. So the Jewish people that were there were saying, Abraham is our father. And Jesus said, He said it just like that too. And once you see Jesus say, you'll never, ever forget it. So the power of Jesus' denial of their genealogical inheritance to being the ones the scripture was talking about is definitive. It is clear. And he said that the Jews were not where that this line came from. And he made it very clear. He said, if you were of Abraham, he said, you'd know who I was.
Mm-hmm.
He said, you don't even know who I am. And what does that do? When hermeneutics are wrong, you can't even recognize Christ.
Yeah.
But when hermeneutics are right, you can see Christ,
mm-hmm.
and you can see the power of Christ. When you fail to see Christ through the hermeneutics of the gospel, you're going to deny Christ. We've got people on our own Facebook that have been dear friends, and it still are. It's not that we've not stopped being friends with anybody. But that now have come to this very wise and uninformed, they think informed conclusion that really the work of Christ was just a revelation. It didn't do anything. He didn't die for sin. He didn't do any of these things. So the power of what we learned from Jesus' teaching on hermeneutics, it's unparalleled. It's never been taught before that I know of by anybody in the last 2,000 years as to how Jesus realigned the structures and showed us where the fault line in hermeneutics began. The fault line began after they broke covenant, and then they began to try to reestablish covenant, and it went into a genetic line. They thought it was genetic line, and they exercised that genetic line, and Jesus said, how do you get around that? Jesus said to the Jews, you are not of Abraham, you're of your father the devil. So, and he was talking about their religion. He wasn't even talking about their genetic origins. He was talking about their perspective, their perspective of the scriptures being all about them. It's not about them. So what you're going to learn today, as I said, Daniel and I really had an in-depth conversation about exactly where to go, because we could show you in every one of the New Testament letters how this applies. And yet, the time and time again, as always plagues me, is the book of Romans. The book of Romans is my plague. So. And it's been a wonderful plague to deal with. As I've made reference to that in this study of hermeneutics, it still just is like a bright beaming light on whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. And I can't get away from it. It's just the clarity that was brought in that by Paul himself, and we missed it because our hermeneutics was wrong. Mm-hmm. We thought it was, we didn't have any information. I never had any information at all. The best we had was Hegel's process of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And there is no synthesis in this at all. There is thesis and antithesis there, but there is no synthesis. It is one is right and one is wrong. Mm-hmm. And Paul made that very clear. So that just jumps out at me so much. And as Daniel and I have talked about it, it's like, so what do we do? I mean, how many times can you teach on the book of Romans? And it's like, well, evidently, one more time. And I think you'll see why that we made this decision. We wanted to be the most effective as we can be with this understanding of hermeneutics. And I think if we keep this, as the Gospel Revolution has become known for, highly focused on context, and the only way we can do that is stay in the book. And suddenly I began to see how that the very first chapter correlates all the way to the 11th chapter, which we see as the very last chapter of Romans. Chapter 12 is something that cannot be proven with Paul's writings. Everything changes. And it's not that Paul can't change his mind, but when he said amen, he said amen. That's what he says at the end of chapter 11 is this is the best I've got. I've given you everything I've got. And then start backing up and saying, but you really ought to live right. Sorry, that just was not Paul, and we do not accept that. We've been able to prove that based on the Greek words that are used, based on the sentence structure, and also the length of sentences, and also just the contradiction of content. The content just changes completely. You might say, well, Mike, I just want to keep chapter 12 in there. Well, go ahead, just don't and try to incorporate it in chapter 1 through 11, except what every diagnostic of it is that it's different. It switches subjects altogether. So even if you want to include chapter 12, that's quite all right. But please don't let chapter 12 dilute chapter 1 through chapter 11.
And you'll see, even as we go through it now, understanding the hermeneutics, we put aside all the sentence structure, the Greek, and all of that.
Yes.
And you'll see the hermeneutics just, it throws it away.
Now, as Daniel said, the reason we're going through this is we've shown you that through many different methods, but now we're going for the big dog. And we're going to let the hermeneutics of the gospel define what Paul was saying to the Romans. Remember, this I get chills because I kind of put myself back there. We're kind of looking over Paul's shoulder right now. I've listened to Paul. I've yelled at Paul. I've tried to interpret Paul. And now that I feel like that we are standing over his shoulder, watching him write this letter to the church at Rome. A letter to a group of people that he knows that Peter started this church, and Peter has taught them doctrines he does not agree with.
Romans chapter 1, verse 1. Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated unto the gospel of God, which he had promised afore by his prophets in the Holy Scriptures.
That's a good place to stop, isn't it, Dave? So this is Paul anchoring what he's about to say in the Scriptures.
And himself.
Yes, and anchoring himself in the Scriptures. We went through that. Thank you for that reminder. We now know that Paul himself was anchored in the Scriptures. He was foretold. He was prophesied. The wolf of the tribe of Benjamin. And man, maybe we ought to just go teach on that. We've done all the validation of Paul's ministry as compared to all the other disciples. None of them were prophesied about to be carrying this truth. And Paul was prophesied to carry this truth. And if you're wondering where in the world you come up with that, please just go on to the website and do some research on the videos that we did. We did a lot of work on the ministry of Paul.
Yeah, the disciples, they were called as well, but they were called to be witnesses.
Yes.
Paul, his call was to be an apostle of the gospel of God. Verse 3, concerning his son, Jesus Christ, our Lord, which was made of the seed of David according to the flesh, and declared to be the Son of God with power according to the Spirit of holiness by the resurrection from the dead.
Here Paul is lining this hermeneutics up. He is making sure they're not going to disagree with this first. He's leading them into a trap. Just to let you know, he's opening the trap and he is setting this out. And the day that I ever become as good of a teacher as Paul was. Because here he lays this open and things they cannot disagree with. They do know these things are true. The problem is, after they come to know these things to be true, then Peter began to teach them, and others around him began to teach them that everything was not fulfilled in Christ. And so it had to be about them. So this is where the hermeneutics went really bad, and has stayed bad ever since, because Paul was unsuccessful in dislodging this doctrine in the book of Romans to the group of Christians here. I don't know which group was called Christians and which were not. We know what Christianity is today. We know that it has absolutely nothing to do with the gospel, except that what Paul has got them to agree to here. And now what we begin to find out after Paul establishes this commonality that anyone who names the name of Christ is that Christ did these things. Now what he's going to begin to do is point out why this cannot be about you now. After we have watched this incredible fulfillment, and he said everything that we watched, we heard it in the scriptures first. Everything we've seen, we saw it first in the scriptures, and we didn't even know it until after it happened, because that's when our eyes were open to this. And Christ himself took us back to the scriptures and law, the Psalms and the prophets, and showed us how that it was all about him. So he is already laying this open for an incredible description and declaration for this church at Rome, which exists to this day.
You know, Michael, it's interesting, verse 3, concerning his son Jesus Christ our Lord, which was made of the seed of David according to the flesh. You know, that was one of the corrections that Jesus brought to the Jews was, they said he's the son of David. Well, yeah, the lineage certainly was according to the flesh. But again, that's a diversion from the fact that this was divine to divine. You see, David, even though he was a part of that process, his position was raised that this was a promise to David. Wrong. This was a promise to the seed of David. This was a promise to the seed of Abraham. It was about the seed, which is Christ. It's all about Christ.
Yeah, it's very powerful, and he's not denying the genealogical lineage. He's just saying that's not where it went.
Yeah,
it didn't go through a genealogy anymore. And saying that you are of Abraham doesn't mean flip. It really doesn't. I won't say it like Jesus said. Your father's the devil. So I'm a little nicer than Jesus. So my goodness, we're making progress here.
Maybe you are an adult.
I may be becoming more childlike also. But all options are open as to what might happen here. All right, so this is a very powerful point that Daniel has raised and taken us back to, is that Paul is not reducing the lineage. He is setting it aside because God himself set it aside. So what Paul is doing is tracking the divine and trying to find the other end of this and seeing, does the divine go toward the descendants of David, or does the divine go to the ascendant of David, who was, not do that.
You did that.
He was the ascendant of David, and when David took the throne, Christ ascended to the throne. So, man, I got chill bumps. This did not transfer from David's descendants, it transferred to David's ascendant. I could just sit here and say that over and over now. So here we have Paul tracking this ascendancy, not the descendancy. And that's what you're going to find throughout this, is we go from here now trying to help these people get back on track by following the ascendancy instead of the descendancy.
And declared to be the Son of God with power according to the Spirit of holiness by the resurrection from the dead. Verse 5. by whom we have received grace and apostleship for obedience to the faith among all nations for his name, among whom you are also the called of Jesus Christ.
So Paul kind of puts everybody, he said, yes, I'm called, but he says you've got to understand that within that calling from the scriptures, that you have that calling also from the scriptures. But it is not through, so he's making sure they understand that this did not come through your genealogical lineage. This came through the scriptures and through the Spirit and through the ascendancy of Christ to the throne at 1,000 years before, because that's as far as it came through David, was up to that point. And from that point, it switched from, I'm going to say it a lot, from descendancy to ascendancy. May it be the best thing you ever heard.
Verse 7, to all that be in Rome, beloved of God, called to be saints, grace to you and peace from God our Father, from the Lord Jesus Christ. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all, that your faith is spoken of throughout the whole world.
Now, there's a couple of really wonderful things to track here, and he says to all that be in Rome. And what he's saying here is to all of Peter's followers. He said, you're called, and that the term to be is italicized. He said, you're called saints, not this. And to this day, this to be saints rules Rome.
Yeah.
It is a process of becoming saints, and you can't even get there till after you're dead. And then you have to have proven to perform 2 or 3 miracles. It's like you got to wait till you're dead, and then people that report on it years and even hundreds of years later, by their testimony and what they saw that they said happened, you become a saint because of 1 or 2 miracles. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
I thought these were supposed to be the way as Daniel was told, that's the dinner bell. Is the dinner bell not ringing or what? I mean, it just doesn't make any difference. But at least they're looking at more critically in the Catholic Church things that could actually be called a miracle. So hooray for them for that, but still, thanks for playing. Then to all the saints that be in Rome, called saints, grace to you all and peace from God our Father. So this is Paul's reaffirmation of the difference between what Peter and the other disciples are teaching and what our mystic friends are teaching. And that is grace and peace be to you. So grace and peace are not current commodities that are being passed out. Grace and peace are what was declared and given to the entire human race as he's appointed where this took place at the resurrection. Where did grace and peace come to the human race? It came at the cross. Now, our mystic friends want to flatten this out and just really take Christ out of the equation altogether and do that to your own comfort. But I know a lot of you that have followed and understood, tried to understand Christ all your life, but look at where you've come. You've come to a point of where that you're discrediting the work of Christ. I don't get that. Now, if you could show me where the scriptures do that, but you can't show me in the scriptures where that happens because you're comparing verse to verse in the New Testament. That's where 46,000 denominations come from, and you just started another one by making these they are false comparisons. They are forced comparisons. And don't let anybody trap you in this forced comparison. All you have to do is back up and say, no, I'm not getting involved in trying to figure out this verse from that verse or within this verse, because there is logic within it. But once that paradigm, that forced paradigm is put on you, is that you've got to resolve this. No, you don't. The scriptures resolve that. Don't let people force you into a false choice. And that's what these are. Everyone that has taken the mystical route and says that the work of Christ is unnecessary, and as Francois says, could have been the blood of any man, they have done so by allowing people or themselves to be forced into a false choice. That is a false choice. We always go back to the scriptures, and you will not find this ineffectiveness or the degrading of the work of Christ in the scriptures. Remember, the power of the cross is not what happened after it. It's the power of the cross is declared in what was foretold about it.
Mm. Yeah, Michael, then he goes and he seems like he is testifying about their faith that's spoken of throughout all the world.
That is true, and we don't know for sure. I tell you what, once you get to chapter 11, you may look back and say, was Paul being a little facetious? We know that Paul could be facetious in his statements. We could sit here and point them out all day long as to how Paul made statements to people and about people of like, so you're the great thing, right? And he did that repeatedly. So he may very well be doing this and saying, your faith is heard out throughout all the world. Now, the thing that makes us question as to whether or not he's affirming their faith or lifting it up to where that it can actually be evaluated. Now, let me tell you what I think he was doing. I think that he was raising the issue of their faith, giving it, okay, let's take your faith. It's the greatest faith there is in the land. So now let's look at that faith and see what it cannot do, has and has not done. If you guys have all of that kind of faith, let's look at it a little bit closer. Do you think that's a fair view? We're going to let that stand for right now. Was Paul mocking them? Paul was indeed a character, that's for sure. But we don't know for sure from this context as to whether or not it's not embedded in there in any way. But by comparison, it is possible that he was definitely setting them up. We know that obviously Romans chapter 1 is a setup for the rest of the whole letter, right? And that's true with Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. All of their first chapters are a tee-up of what he's wanting to bring to a conclusion. And Paul always brought everything to a conclusion, not a synthesis. It's very important that you know that the hermeneutics of the gospel and all of the letters of Paul never led to a synthesis of the doctrines of Peter, James, and John and his. It always led to a conclusion as to which one was right and which one was wrong.
Well, Michael, we might not have to wait till chapter 10 because he says that your faith is spoken of throughout all the world. And then verse 9, he says, but God is my witness.
Uh-oh.
He says,
sneaky thing.
He says, for God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit.
Oh, my goodness.
In the gospel of the Son, that without ceasing I make mention of you in my prayers.
If your faith's so great, why am I having to pray for you?
Yeah.
So, Daniel, you are exactly right. He's let them know that the whole world is their witness, but you take the whole world and all of the witness that your faith is great, but God is my witness of what I'm saying and what I'm doing. Boy, I tell you, Paul was a little stinker here, wasn't he? And then goes on to say, making request if by any means, now at length, I might have a prosperous journey by the will of God to come unto you. For I long to see you, that I may impart unto you some spiritual gift, since you've got nothing from me at all to this point. Maybe I can impart some spiritual gift to you. You've got it all by your faith. And your affirmation is the whole world talks about that. My affirmation is that God talks about me. And that this really is, if you just follow the flow of this, it's much more dynamic. You got to take it out of its religious context and hearing angels sing in the background while you read through Romans and them singing out of the Catholic Church or the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. And just let this speak for itself. So far, I'm really enjoying this. I hope you are.
Yeah, and he says, to the end that you might be established. I mean, if your faith is spoken of throughout all the world, do you think there would be some establishment? But yet, Paul had something that he felt that he would add to this church, something they hadn't heard, something that they haven't experienced yet.
And something they hadn't acknowledged that they'd ever heard, that's for sure. Because Paul's saying that this would be the first impartation he gave to this church. Maybe you can gain something here, even though you got the greatest faith in the whole wide world. I may have something to impart, and impart he did.
Yeah.
And for us to walk through this impartation of Paul to the church at Rome. So we go through this, and what you're going to see in Romans is we go through Paul. And I want to mention this first so that you don't get lost. A lot of people get lost in this declaration of men with men and women with women. What Paul is doing here is indeed finding a point of agreement. They all agree that this is something that neither one of them accepted. That even as it is today, if you get to the lowest of the low, it's going to be a gay person, right? So. Why did I say that? But I tell you what, I remember when I understood grace and I told people, I said, you will not take away my condemnation, because in my condemnation is my salvation, is my redemption. It's all wrapped up in my condemnation. You may not get to hold the high and honored privilege of being in that category of being a blasphemy or being the worst of the worst by declaration, and even here in this letter. But you're going to see that that's what Paul is doing. He's setting them up to show them what has been produced by your faith. So what we're going to go through now is Paul is going to describe the manifestations that come out of personal faith, that it produces something. It does produce something. And he leads them right down a primrose path, gives them something that they all can agree on. We all know that's bad. And then, boy, watch how he turns this on them completely.
Verse 12, that is, that I may be comforted together with you by mutual faith, both of you and me. Now I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, that oftentimes I purposed to come unto you, but was let hitherto, that I might have some fruit among you also, even as among the other Gentiles.
Oh my gosh. He really is being facetious here, because only Paul carried the gospel to the Gentiles. These people had accepted. Now, this church at Rome was mixed with Gentiles and with Jews. They both were there. But under this misconception, the Gentiles believed that God had cut the Jews off and then had accepted the Gentiles and then brought the Jews back in. The Jews could come back in through belief. So the Gentiles thought that they got in through believing in the cross and the work of the cross, only because that the Jews were cut off. You'll see this down in chapter 11. Paul goes through both of them and lets them both understand you're both in this the wrong direction. You where you stand is a place that leads to some not good outcomes, and you're going to see what those not good outcomes are. So the Jews thought that they were in it because they were chosen, and the Gentiles believed they were in it because the Jews got cut off. Neither were true. Neither were true. And this is the complication of the book of Romans. But remember, we're standing over Paul's shoulder. We're hearing his heartbeat. We're listening. We're listening for every cue and every word that he is speaking here to see if we can see and hear what it is he had to say. And with this dynamic understanding of the hermeneutics of the gospel.
I am debtor both to the Greeks and to the barbarians, both to the wise and the unwise. So as much as is in me is, I am ready to preach the gospel to you that are in Rome also.
Whoa. What do people with the greatest faith in the world need more gospel for? Paul is making this devastatingly clear in a very cunning way. He acknowledges them. I'm telling you, this is a smooth operator we got here. He gives them their accolades and then kind of says, yeah, wink and a nod to your accolades. God's my witness. All of the known world is your witness. You can pick which one's best. And then he goes into this and says, I'm going to try to get there and give you something because as I've been bringing the gospel to the Gentiles, and yet you guys seem to, whatever you know it without any of the information that I have. So I'm really looking forward to bringing you some information, and maybe you can benefit from it the way the rest of the whole Gentile world has. And maybe you guys at Rome, the Gentiles in the church there, you also can benefit from this also, and possibly hear the gospel for the very first time.
For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith.
Incredible statements. Continuing on, Daniel, here, he says that the gospel is important because it is a revelation of the righteousness of God. Now, the cross is not a revelation of the righteousness of God. The cross is obtaining the righteousness of God. The gospel, which followed after the cross, is simply the preaching of that which has been accomplished, which you can read all about in the scriptures. But Paul is making it very clear here that the gospel reveals. And what a lot of our friends have tried to say is that the cross is a revealer and a revealer only. That is a cross-pollination of two different subjects that is just a tragedy in motion to try to take the good news of the gospel after it, which we know. I've stated it for over 30 years, folks. The gospel doesn't give you anything. The gospel produces nothing. It gives you nothing. Everything that we were to get, we got through the cross. The gospel reveals. It does not do anything. It reveals. And the first two things that Paul taught, and even in this book, he said the first two things that the gospel is going to get rid of is guilt, and then it gets rid of judgment. And you're going to see where he lets them know your faith has filled you with guilt and it's filled you with judgment, especially judgment.
Yeah, and the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith.
Oh, very good.
Faith is involved, but whose faith to whose faith?
Right.
Is it your faith that's heard of throughout all the world, or is it as Habakkuk? And he quotes Habakkuk here that says that the just shall live by his, speaking of the Christ, by his faith.
And this is one of those places where this gets flattened out, not by Paul, but by the translators. So we have to go back to see the full impact sometimes of what Paul said. We have to go back to the actual scripture and read it, because we know Paul knew what it said. But you see, when the translators got into this, they homogenized a lot of this to fit that you've got to believe. And that's the problem that's had here. And Paul knew that, but we're dealing with it in its origins as to when faith got misplaced and it was placed on the human race rather than where it was originally designated, and that was from divine to divine. Our faith has nothing to do with this. And Paul made it very clear that he lived by the faith of the Son of God, and that it had nothing to do with his faith. Paul didn't exercise belief in anything. Paul exercised the fact that faith had accomplished its very powerful duty in securing righteousness, not just for him, but for the whole world.
You mean the hermeneutics applies to faith too?
Profoundly, joyfully, yes. This hermeneutics does place faith in the right context, that it is from divine to divine. Faith is about divine to divine. Read Hebrews chapter 10, and you'll see that we misplace this by not reading it in context. It says, by faith, we understand that God created the worlds. And then it goes on and then begins to say, by faith, that all of these people, Rahab the harlot and all of these, but you see he's already established by whose faith? the faith that is spoken of that resulted in all of these success stories was not their faith. It is established by Hebrews that it was the faith of God. The very same faith that formed the worlds together is the faith that caused all these things to happen. And of course, if you've got a Hegel concept of synthesizing, you're going to say, well, both are true, and then come out on the other side of it with not even a half gospel, a non-gospel whatsoever.
Verse 18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who hold the truth in unrighteousness. But that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has showed it unto them.
And here he's making it very clear. I mean, if you don't think there's any such thing as wrath from God involved in this issue of your faith, my faith, whoever's faith you are attributing it to, the one thing that we do know was that the thing that was involved in the process of this was the wrath of God. So Paul has gone back to a known subject now. We all agree on this. And that's why this is so important, to agree upon the wrath of God. Paul said that this is the point. See, this is not a false comparison here. You're being forced to make a declaration of that if Christ is the express image of God, then tell me how that God could have done this. But even in Hebrews chapter 1, it makes it very clear God spoke to us in two different ways before he spoke to us now through Christ. So when he talks about Christ being the full expression, it's the full expression after completion. So that statement in Hebrews does not take away, does not cancel out 80% of the Hebrew text. It simply places it in order and says that God spoke to us through the fathers, through the prophets, and now that it's all done, he speaks to us through his Son. And that voice that comes now through the Son, or came through the Son, and comes through the Son, is now one of absolute peace. There's no division, nothing at all. But don't allow people to force you into a false comparison and a false decision about either one way. It has to be one way or the other. And I've read their letters even up to just yesterday of just forcing this. They force this to be answered. You must answer this question. No, I do not. The question must be answered. How in the world can you leave all of the Hebrew scriptures out and then come to a conclusion about any subject pertaining to the gospel?
Verse 20, for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and they changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into the image made like a corruptible man, and to the birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things.
Now, this doesn't come from the attempt to rebel against God. This comes through the attempt to be in covenant with God. And this is not a good conclusion. This is what happened. And this story has never been about people who were against God. This was about people who were attempting or wanted to be in covenant with God. But they missed the mark here. So they just like 2 Kings 17 says, and they rejected his statutes and his covenant. So these are people who knew that there was covenant to be had with God, and they completely rejected. Jeremiah chapter 2 says, thus saith the Lord, what iniquity have your fathers found, and that they are gone far from me and have walked after vanity. Now, the reason they did that is because the covenant was broken. and then they wanted to try to reestablish covenant, and it couldn't be done. These are people who just surrendered to the inevitable. You cannot do this, and so the results here are devastating. But had any of them ever come to the knowledge of understanding that it wasn't about them anyway? This is not about their morality. This is about their definitions and understanding of truth.
Verse 24, where God also gave them up to uncleanliness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen.
This is what happens when you mess up your hermeneutics. This is, as you'll see, we're going to let Paul speak for himself. I don't want to insert here. But this is Paul letting us know what happens when the covenant is not understood to be between divine and divine. What happens to the human race is not a good thing.
For this cause God gave them up to vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves the recompense of their error, which was meat.
So Paul's going into from creation, the way things were at the beginning of creation. And then he says that these things are not natural. And that's the thing that you find after the elimination of the Garden of Eden. Nothing was natural anymore, not natural to the garden. And this is the outcome of the incredible thing that happened with the flood. Now, we do a lot of teaching on that. We actually have a lot of information on this on the website. I've done a tremendous amount of teaching on the flood and the changes that happened during that. So what Paul is identifying here is things that are now against nature. It's against nature that Daniel and I are sitting here nice and warm inside while there's ice outside the window. That's against nature. We are against nature. The fact that you can get on an airplane and fly back home 1,000 miles away and be there in a couple of hours, that's against nature. So I'm not trying to trivialize this situation, but we're wanting to show that this is something, and I'm going to, like we said, we're going to let Paul speak for himself. Why is he bringing this up? Is it because these people were not included at the cross? Is that the reason that Paul's bringing this up? Is Paul bringing this up is because that gay people are simply not accepted by God? You do know that that is the way this is defined by most of Christianity, is that anybody who is a gay person or homosexual, that they simply are not accepted by God. But let's look and see at how Paul resolves this in what his target message is. Has Paul decided that he's just going to be against gay people, and we're going to finish this whole thing out about being against gay people altogether? We agree on that, and there's nothing better about Christianity other than we all agree about gay people. That seems to be the thing that holds Christianity together right now, is what they're against, not what they're for.
Verse 28, and even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind, to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliceness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whispers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them.
All right, so we've expanded the list. At least my category has been expanded here, and it includes all of these. So Paul has taken something very clever here and shown something that's very easy to socially rally the troops against, right? And he's shown that this is no different than any of these things. All of it is all the same thing. The term that is really quite shocking is this term without natural affection. This does not mean a man wanting to be with a man or a woman wanting to be with a woman. This is a parent not wanting to be with their child. This is that is the without natural affections. In fact, before this all got translated into it's all about gay people, this is what was said during the 16, 17, and even the 1800s. They would say that a mother doesn't have natural affections for her child. She doesn't have that mothering instinct. Or the father didn't have natural affection for his children. This was never, ever, ever used until this last 50, 60 years. This term was never used the way that it is now. And implacable, that just means unwilling to resolve an issue. Not willing to work things out. They don't like working things out. This is you become to where that you thrive on the conflict instead of looking for peace. And folks, I tell you, once you cross that line, there is nothing more perverse in this world than thriving on the conflict and making sure the conflict it gets flamed, because the conflict is where you get people to join you. And that's exactly what Paul has done. He has tricked them into joining in on the grievance. This is the grievance. Come on now, let's all agree on this. And that's exactly what he's done. Now he's shaken them a little bit because he's expanded the issue. And he's carried it into even people that, parents that don't really care about their kids. And vice versa, that's without natural affections. So he's expanded this, and while he's addressing their great faith.
Chapter 2 starts off, therefore, thou art inexcusable, O man.
Wow. Therefore, you are inexcusable.
O man, whosoever thou art that judgest. For wherein thou judgest another, thou condemneth thyself. For thou that judgest doest the same things.
Wow. You're as guilty as the man laying with the man and the woman laying with the woman. You remember all that we all agreed on? We all agreed on that, right? But when you judge those people, you are the same as what you've judged. Now, if there's any good dose that Christianity could use, this would be it. I recommend Paul's letter to the Romans on this and all subjects, and take the whole list. When you're judging relationship with God and who's in and who's out, then you have defaulted to a false premise that the faith to faith is the faith of God to the faith of man. And as Paul has already made it very clear here, that is a false comparison, and I'm not going to stand for it. So we're going to take what you're doing in your comparison with other people, and let's let your judgment stand, and now let's look at it from that perspective. And so isn't it amazing, he didn't come through this chapter 1 and say, therefore, these people are, continue on. He's already said they're without excuse. Why didn't he go on and explain what that excuse does? Why didn't he go on and explain what all the consequences of all of these, this terrible list that he came up with? Instead, look what he's done. He's saying, therefore, you are inexcusable, O man, whosoever thou art that judgest. So he went through this whole diatribe of this group of people, and we all agree on this. We all agree on this. But if you're the one that's judging them, you are equally guilty of of doing what you have judged them for being.
But we are sure that the judgment of God is according to the truth against them which commit such things.
Yep. And thank God that judgment of God was sure.
Mm.
And that judgment of God was carried out at the cross. And that judgment of God needs to be acknowledged and honored, that the judgment of God was passed at the cross. That's what Jesus said in John chapter 5. He said, the Father has taken all of his judgment and he's passed that decision of judgment on to me. And that I would be the one that would resolve his judgment. And that's why Jesus made the agreement. God didn't send his son to be slaughtered at the cross. Christ was the one who made the decision to do that. He was the one who agreed to take the judgment. And even as it says now, is the judgment of God. And now's the hour, now's the time. And yet people want to deny this incredible hour of the cross.
Mm. And thinkest thou this, O man, that judgest them which do such things, and doest the same, that thou shalt escape the judgment of God?
So he's bringing this all in. You're all toast. Even in your faith, you have left your backside open here, if you will. Your faith is not covering your judgments. And faith can never cover judgments. Man's faith will never cover man's judgments. And only God's faith can cover God's judgments. And God's judgments have been carried out, and the verdict is in. You are righteous. Even everybody in this entire list. Mm. That is the conclusion that Paul has reached for and has made very clear here, that if you judge any of these, then you have done the same. So what is the only answer? There's only one answer. See, there is no thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Paul did not synthesize the issue of homosexuality. He didn't synthesize the issue of being blasphemers or covenant breakers. He didn't synthesize it at all. He says, yep, it's all condemned. And here's the little nuance that you do not realize is an absolute truth. If you judge any one of these, you are guilty of doing the same thing.
Mm. Or despiseth thou the riches of his goodness and forbearance and long suffering, not knowing that the goodness of God leadeth thee to repentance?
Now here Paul is making it very clear that you're despising the goodness and the forbearance of God. So by continuing to judge people, you are despising the forbearance and long suffering of God. And he's made this very, very clear. So what is happening in the Christian world today? All of these judgments, what are they? They are despite to the riches of the goodness and the forbearance of God. That's exactly what they are. You may want to judge God, but see, and here's the thing, is that when you judge other people, you have to turn around and judge God, because you're saying that God's judgment was not sufficient.
Mm. But after thy hardness and impenitent hearts treasurest up unto thyself wrath against the day of wrath and revelation of the righteous judgment of God.
Mm-hmm. Which day is, he's already said, was the resurrection from the dead.
Who will render to every man according to his deeds. To them who by patient continuance in well-doing seek for glory and honor and immorality, eternal life.
Let's call that immortality.
Immortality. Yeah. Immortality.
I'm seeking immorality. It sounds like the list of the group up there, right?
Praise the Lord.
So yes, Paul is making it very clear. This is either resolved or it's not resolved. You've either, by your own faith, you've either condemned yourself by leaving others out, or there's something wrong with this entire plan here. And he's made that very, very clear. Now, if you are in that position, if it is from divine to you, you're going to have to wait for it. You're going to have to seek for it. You're going to have immortality. Isn't it funny here? He says, in well-doing, seek for glory and honor and immortality and eternal life. And chapter 10, the end of it says, I was found by them that didn't seek. So you see why we're going back through this is because this incredible, powerful focus that we've been given on the hermeneutics of the gospel has caused us to be able to see from the front to the back, from the beginning to the end, to the middle, to the utter extremes of everything that Paul had to say here. And we can allow this to cause itself to where that we can actually hear what Paul has to say. We're not trying to invent what Paul had to say. We're not trying to lift it out of context. We are simply allowing it to stay here. That's why we decided to do this book of Romans again, is because this is where the gospel is won and lost both, is in the book of Romans.
Verse 8, but unto them that are contentious, and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, indignation, and wrath, tribulation, and anguish upon every soul of man that doeth evil, of the Jew first, and also of the Gentile.
So Paul's made it clear now. You've heard his audience. It's both Jew and both Gentile. And now he's equalizing both. Doesn't make any difference whether you're a Jew or a Gentile. He's saying without judgment, without wrath having been satisfied, without anger and judgment and wrath being satisfied, it doesn't make any difference whether you're a Jew or a Gentile.
Yeah, and then verse 10, but glory and honor and peace to every man that worketh good, to the Jew first, and also to the Gentile, for there is no respect of persons with God.
If it's based on works, it's not going to make any difference whether you're a Jew or a Gentile. Now, Paul didn't say that the person who does good works is going to have all these blessings come to them. He's saying that what he's saying is that it doesn't make any difference whether you're a Jew or a Gentile. In the system that you are evaluating life and righteousness, then there's no favorites. You're not going to be able to say one or the other. It's interesting to note that the Gentiles were literally saying they had taken first rung on the ladder now, because God had cut off the Jews, which is nowhere in the scriptures, but you find Paul addressing it in chapter 11. And he's saying, if God cut off the Jews, you Gentiles don't have a leg to stand on very long. So there was not a cutting off of anybody. It also was not a procession through the genetic line either. So Paul is disqualifying both of these attitudes toward the issue of righteousness, that if it's based on rules, it doesn't make any difference whether you're a Jew or a Gentile. God doesn't respect persons. That should tell us a lot. If God doesn't respect persons, then what did he do? He set persons aside from the entire issue. Because if God had respect to persons, then persons ain't going to make it.
That's good preaching.
How about that?
Yeah. Verse 12, for as many as have sinned without law shall also perish without law.
Yeah.
And as many as have sinned in the law shall be judged by the law. For not the hearers of the law are just before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified.
And here is where most sermons start and end. This is where our sermon is today. For it's not the hearers of the law that are just before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified. You can't take that out of the Bible. The Bible says that if you don't obey the law, you are not justified before God. Whether you've believed in Jesus or not, the thing that you've got to do is to be justified, you must keep God's law. It says it right here. Yes, it does say it right here. And it is also in brackets because Paul is making a quote here and bringing a point home and letting us know that if it's by the law, it is by the law. If it's not by the law, then it's not by the law. And he says this so many different ways throughout this chapter, through this book, that if it's by the law, it's by the law. If it's not by the law, it's not by the law. Then we have to re-examine everything because it's not a mixture of two. There is no synthesizing law and grace. It's either one or the other. There is no synthesizing the gospel of peace with a wrathful and angry God. There is no synthesizing. There's just one is now the truth and the other. The law used to be, it's like saying that the law never was, but that's what a lot of people try to say is that the law came by Moses. And we read in our last session that Christ himself made sure that we understood that everything Moses said came through him and by him, of him, everything that Moses said. And so that it's this, the one thing we're not doing is picking and choosing. We're fitting in here with Paul, and we're saying that what Paul said is true. If it's by the law, then unless you keep the law, you are. It's the doers of the law that shall be justified, when the law is the issue.
For not the hearers of the law are just before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified. For when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these, having not the law, are a law unto themselves, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts, the meanwhile accusing, or else excusing one another.
And here it is. Paul's bringing this thing down to the critical issue about this Jew and Gentile, and the issue of righteousness and judgment. And he said that if this is what happens when you are it's about your faith. When it's about your faith, you're still under the law. Because it's about what you do, it's about what you believe, and that's what happens. And whether you're a Jew or a Gentile, even though the Gentiles are not of the law at all you have to do is tell them that they have to believe, bam, and the law goes off like a landmine. And he says it's very obvious that this is what happens when you introduce personal faith. This is what happens. Then the Gentile actually becomes a judge of the law also, even though they were never given the law at all. The meanwhile accusing and excusing. This is another 40-year-old thing that we've been able to really stick with throughout the gospel revolution and understanding of the gospel, is that the self-righteousness and personal faith will always cause you to accuse, but boy, it will give you every excuse that you can find. So if you can get a group that are accusing, you're going to take somebody out and stone them. But you're going to be just as guilty as the one you're stoning. It's amazing how that it's justifiable to terminate somebody's life, and who it's not justifiable to terminate somebody's life with violence. It's just all over the board. It depends on what the group says. I'm not joining in a group. I'm just not doing it on either side. So Paul's made this very clear. What the law does, even when you make believing a rule or a law, then that even the Gentile then gets this mindset of law, and then they begin to go around doing what the Jews have always done, accusing and excusing.
Verse 16, in the day when God shall judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ according to my gospel. Now, I know you have your interlinear open. Is that a shall be, or shall not be in there?
Shall ain't there. That's in the day that God judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ. This is not a shall be. This is a did. This is what he did. And now, see, it can't be a gospel unless it's a did. So he's saying that God judged the deeds of men at the cross. He's already judged the deeds of man by Christ, and that's why it's now a gospel. It can't be a gospel if it hasn't already happened.
And he said, this is my gospel. He's introducing his gospel to them that never received anything from him before.
You've never received anything from it, and you don't know my gospel. So think about that a moment. Paul is introducing his gospel to a group of people for the very first time. They've never heard it. They got isolated within Rome, and they've never heard the gospel that was given to Paul.
And what is one of the very first things that he's saying about this gospel is that God already judged men.
Yeah, very powerfully.
Verse 17, Behold, thou art called a Jew, and restest,
Mhm.
like rest.
Like
This
rest.
King James, you're tripping me up. I restest this. Resteth in the law, and maketh thy boast of God, and know his will, and approves the things that are more excellent, being instructed out of the law, and art confident that thou thyself art a guide to the blind, a light of them which are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of the babes, which hast, I want that title, a teacher of the babe, which has the form of knowledge and the truth in the law.
Yeah, and he's making sure that you've exalted yourself. So these people are now practicing Christians. And what is a practicing Christian? Someone who uses the law to judge people.
Wow.
That's what a practicing Christian is. And Paul has identified there's an utter fault here, and he's already made this incredible comparison and has caused them, at least hopefully caused them, to revisit and rethink their conclusions.
You therefore which teachest another, teachest thou not thyself? Thou that preachest a man should not steal, dost thou steal? Thou that saith a man should not commit adultery, dost thou commit adultery? Thou that abhorrest idols, dost thou commit sacrilege? Thou that makest thy boast of the law, thou breakest the law, dishonoreth thou God. For the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles through you, as it is written. For circumcision verily profiteth, if thou keep the law, but if thou breaketh the law, thy circumcision is made uncircumcision. Therefore, if uncircumcision keep the righteousness of the law, shall not his uncircumcision be counted for circumcision? And shall not uncircumcision, which is by nature, if it fulfill the law, judge thee, who by the letter and circumcision dost thou transgress the law?
I want you to see how Paul snuck in a little dig here with the issue of circumcision. He says that the circumcision is by, or uncircumcision is by nature. Uncircumcision. Now look what they're trusting in for their covenant. They're trusting in something that is against nature. This is really profound. Paul's writing here. There's not a thing that is a drop stitch somewhere. You have to read carefully. You have to read in context to allow Paul's voice to come through, and that's what we've been doing. Daniel, what does the rest of this say?
So I just want to connect those dots there.
Go ahead.
So you're connecting that to the part where he was talking about men giving up the natural affection for men and women giving up the natural. It was against nature. In the same thing, the very thing that they stand on, circumcision, it's against nature.
Circumcision is against nature. Exactly. That's the concluding point of all of this. And he's brought them full circle, and he's left them standing there going, so, but we're not having to do that because we're looking over Paul's shoulder, looking at the intent, the heart of everything that he has to say here.
For he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision, which is outwardly in the flesh, but he is a Jew, which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of God.
And Paul has brought this all into the conclusion of a difference between an ascension and the descendants. This was not about the Jewish people have an incredible place in the scriptures, but they magnified their position after they fell out of covenant. And it's really quite incredible. We are grateful to have been able to see the oversight of that period of time with Christ from 1,000-year reign. It was so corrupted that Christ had to take up his reign in heaven. That it started at the time of David. And so the corruption was so great in this that that's where God transferred the promise into heaven itself. And it stayed there for 1,000 years, over and above and outside of the issue of Judaism.
So, Michael, up to this point, what I'm seeing is an level playing ground for everybody, for Jew, for Gentile, circumcised, uncircumcised, those with the law, those without the law, those who judge according to the law, those who are not judging according to the law.
Yeah.
Whoever you are, those in faith, those out of faith,
Yes.
those Greek or barbarian, those wise or unwise, same level field. Why? Because it's not about what we do, it's about the divine to the divine.
Yes, we were never in the equation in the first place. So Paul has been very meticulous about dismantling that, as we've tried to be meticulous in dismantling that divine to human. God's not talking to you. God has nothing to say to you. Why? Because he lives in you. This is not you are the divine now. This is not any kind of communication to try to cause humanity to become better. Humanity becomes better based on a decision, based on who they know that they are. And until we know who we are, we're not going to do any better.
And if it's left up to us, I think his argument is, you're all screwed.
You're all screwed.
Yeah.
And you're going to end up excusing everything you do and condemning everything everybody else does. So I've lived in that world, folks, and I've stood and I've condemned and I've judged and I've excused. I'm not there anymore. And sometimes if I slip back into it, I grab myself, nope, you're not going to do that. Please do not mistake me for an adult just because I'm old.
Well, Michael, I think the next time we come back, it's opened up with a question. What advantage then hath the Jew?
Fair question after that. And wondering what the Jews sitting on the left side of the aisle and the Gentiles, the Gentiles feel like they've got a little reprieve and they're turning around to the Jews going, okay, so now you're in the hot seat.
But I think we need a break.
I think so too.
So stay tuned. Look underneath the video. You'll see all the upcoming sessions. You'll see the previous sessions. We got more coming your way.
Love you guys. Next time.